Live. So again, I'll do a little bit of introduction here. Harry Jansen's back to join us. Last week he talked about attics and ventilation. This week we're going to go through some inspection tools and equipment with Harry. And as you can see here in this introductory slide, it's really an overview of what's maybe required in your toolkit. Certainly we can see over to the right-hand side, the traditional, we'll call it sort of handy person's toolbox. Over to the left-hand side, we have some of the common tools that home inspectors or inspectors might be using in the field. And of course, right in the middle, we all know about PPE equipment, especially those face mask things, right?
Yeah.
I don't see any pictures of any F-15s or vans. Are we talking about vehicles or no? Just kidding.
Oh, okay. That's the advanced course.
Okay.
So just to kind of give you a little overview of what Harry's going to talk about. Again, Harry has a long depth of experience in the home inspection field, and certainly with a background in architecture and design, building design and construction. So every inspector has a preference of what tools they want to bring with them on an inspection. What brand they use, that's up to you, and how you want to basically lug them along with you. And that's always been a question for me sometimes is sometimes we have more tools and not enough ways of transporting them. But certainly, I guess nowadays we find ways to get around this. Basically, what we're going to talk about is using this kind of as your guide for your personal inspection tools, especially for those that are involved with the inspections in the field. Our topic today is really not going to cover anything about energy audits as such as a blower door. Certainly, again, a valuable piece of equipment when you're doing energy audits. So let's start with the basics. So Harry, you want to kind of jump in from there?
Yeah, sure, Claude. Listen, before we start, I just want to mention that we are born with 4 tools. And if we use them wisely, we can do an awful lot without all these other tools. And the 4 tools we're born with is sight or vision, smell, touch, feel, and hearing. So now you might wonder, how would that help me do home inspections? Well, sight. You go up to a building and does it look like it's leaning compared to the other building you're looking at? So, and smell, does it smell? Do I smell sewage? Do I smell mold? Touch, does it feel wet? I don't even have a moisture meter. My fingers can tell me if something's wet. And hearing, we can hear things. If the floors creak when we walk across, we can, all our senses, we should use them every time we do a home inspection. So let's start with the basics. Sometimes it's dark when we go somewhere, so we need a flashlight even though we have vision. It helps us with the vision. Now, with a flashlight, don't buy a cheap flashlight at Canadian Tire that has 2D batteries in it, because it won't even last you half an hour. A good flashlight is probably about $100 in that range, and it's rechargeable, and it'll last a couple of hours a day. Ladders, there's a big debate on whether you have a big vehicle and you can carry a big ladder on your roof racks. I like the Telesteps ladder. It folds down. There's 2 sizes. You can put it in the trunk of your car. It's very handy, and it's lightweight. And you don't need a big vehicle. Screwdrivers, I found you need just about every one of them, because most screws are the Robertson, but then the day you forget to bring a Phillips screwdriver, that's the day there's Phillips screws in the electrical panel. A tape measure, I usually bring a tape measure to give to the clients so they can measure the curtains while I'm doing the inspection. A level, it's kind of important. instead of level, you could use a ball bearing, steel ball bearing. And if it rolls all over the floor is obviously not level. Safety glasses, self-explanatory. Gloves, a tool bag or a tool belt, definitely, because you have to be able to carry your tools and you don't want to leave your tools behind at the house. Nothing more embarrassing than going back the next day and asking, did you find my flashlight or did you find my screwdrivers or whatever? And a camera. Obviously, we have to document what we see. And that's a good start with tools. And the next, it's a start, you're right. We could, with a flashlight and electrical tester, we could probably do 90%, except we need a ladder for the attic and possibly getting up on the roof. Anyone have any questions so far?
We're going to talk about cameras and the types of cameras and filing of cameras and keeping of records. Do we go into that at all in this presentation? Because documentation is, and I guess report writing, maybe that might be the topic, report writing, but you know, photography, and make sure you keep them because you know years later you need them, right? So are we going to talk about that as well, or is that another topic?
We can talk about that, and of course, with all our reports, we have to keep them. Most provinces require that we keep the reports for 7 years, as well as pictures, of course. And cameras, there's so many cameras on the market today. Get one that's simple to use and has good storage and memory. And I think, and just keep snapping away at pictures and save them. Now, you might want to later on, after you finish the inspection, if you've taken too many, you might want to delete some because you don't have to keep every single picture of every little thing. You want to keep the ones that are really relevant to your report.
So I'll kind of skip through the next few slides for you, Harry. I think one of the important points that our audience needs to basically think about is what tools do you really need to do the job that you have to do? And certainly, I think you indicated earlier that we are born with a bunch of natural inborn, we'll say, inspection tools that function fairly well for us: sight, smell, hearing, etc. But sometimes we have to go beyond and just kind of back up what we really think is going on, right?
Yeah, I think probably the tester is an important tool, a flashlight, a ladder, and a moisture meter. And I think that probably would allow you to do most inspections with those tools alone. Because if there's a gas leak, a natural gas leak, unless your nose doesn't work, you can smell it. You don't need a moisture or a meter to prove that there's a gas leak. Your nose will tell you there's a gas leak.
I just noticed on chat here, guys, that Priscilla actually raised a good question, PPE usage. You know, she said bad rodent infections, but I remember talking to some inspectors and they opened the door on a crawl space and he inhaled the mold, and some of them were actually very seriously got sick just on the first whiff. And so that, you know, the PPE is probably even more prevalent today than in the past, right? I guess you can't be, you know, overly protective.
Yes, but I personally have only once or twice worn personal protective equipment because when you go up to a home, you can typically see right off the bat if it's been well maintained. You open the front door and you look inside, and if it looks nice and clean, then you're probably going to be safe, except maybe when you go up into the attic. Then you need a mask and and maybe personal equipment if you feel there's an issue. I don't feel you want to be dressed like a Martian doing a home inspection.
I think one of the issues, Harry, that you and I are familiar with, one of the inspectors here in Ontario went up into an attic and was introduced to bat guana, and he was fairly sick and probably off work for months. So certainly respiratory issues, going into crawl spaces, as we know, can be, you kind of have to make a judgment call. Do I really want to go in there because I see electrical wires hanging into a wet, damp crawl space? So we know that it kind of getting onto that whole issue of PPE is certainly the equipment side of it, but also the common sense side of it. Do I really want to go up in that attic or crawl space?
Yes, and this is where, as a home inspector, we all make individual choices. And if any one of us feel that it's unsafe to do any item in the home, then you put that in your report. I did not enter the crawl space because there was water standing. I saw snakes. I saw whatever you saw. You note that in your report, because we're our own health and safety board.
Any comments about the next slide here, Harry? We see two different types of flashlights.
Flashlights. Yeah, I have the little Fenix flashlight, and it has served me really well. It's about 6-8 inches long. As I said before, it's rechargeable. It gives lots of light. Once in a while, I have used a big Stanley flashlight because it will light up the whole attic space. But typically, the one flashlight will do quite well.
Yeah,
But again, it's an individual choice that each one of us have to make of what kind of tools we buy. Don't buy cheap tools because they won't last.
Yeah, and that was my comparison here. When we see this slide, for example, that Voltax LED light is really something you can pick up at the local dollar store for about $3 to $5. Of course, the Stanley on the other side is something that certainly is rechargeable. It's a nice handheld unit, fairly nice and bright, so that when you're in a dark space, obviously something like that, you need good quality lighting, right, Harry?
Yeah, yeah. And each circumstance will dictate what kind of lighting we need. If it's a crawl space and there's one light bulb hanging in the crawl space, you need a good flashlight. And the next picture shows how the flashlight lights up the area.
So how about electrical testers? Any thoughts there?
Well, I have the pencil one, the first one, the yellow one on the left. It just tells me if wires are live. And we are not required to do voltage measurements or voltage drop or amperage or anything of that nature. So I think the voltage stick and an outlet tester will get you through most any electrical inspection. And again, there's different kinds. And if you're going to buy an outlet tester, buy the one that's in the center, the red one, with the little black button. It'll allow you to trip the ground fault circuit interrupters by pushing the little black button. The digital readout one, if you like to see what the voltage is at an outlet, then go ahead, but we're not required to have that.
Very good points. So, so these electrical testers, probably what, you can pick them up for about what, maybe 25 bucks or less?
Yeah,
Uh,
probably
the,
$20.
yeah, the 21, the red ones.
Yeah,
On the other side, that digital readout one, you're probably looking at probably a couple $100.
yes, for sure. Yeah. Now, don't forget, our standards of practice, and we have to remember, if you're an electrician, you go ahead and get as many different tools as you like, but we are not required to have all those different types of tools, like the one on the right or the one on the left, the clamp on meter.
I guess a couple of things to point out, certainly in both of these illustrations or photographs, rather, we can see an energized water line. So again, a useful tool, not necessarily for every home inspection or every inspection, but if you want to go into further detail, that's what these tools can do and what they're really used for, right?
And they do work very well for the situation shown in these pictures, but they go way beyond what we are required to do. And one thing I've learned over the years, tools can also get us into trouble. If they're not used properly, you can create more trouble for yourself than if you had just left it alone. A good example is a moisture meter, the electronic type that with the two pads on the back. If you put it against a corner bead, of course it'll beep and indicate that it's wet, but it's not really wet. It's just you're on metal. So of course the metal conducts a little bit of current and it goes beep, 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 beep. So we have to use tools wisely if we're going to go into using tools an awful lot. Make sure you know how to use them properly.
Good, very good points. Okay, so we want to do something with kind of checking temperatures here, right, Harry?
Yeah, yeah, and an infrared laser thermometer, you can get them for about 150 bucks. And a lot of you have probably seen that being used when you went in the store and they measure your temperature on the forehead. Now that's a medical grade one, but these are just for measuring, say, the water coming out of a outlet or the heat coming out of a floor register. So these do have uses, again, not required for what we do, but if you go become a little more competent and want to offer your clients a little more, then you need some of these extra tools.
And again, just for the record, just to kind of indicate, these are my photographs, and I took 3 temperature readings on 3 different heat sources, trying to measure the temperature. So for example, on the wall, that outside building wall of my house, the temperature on the drywall was reading 64 degrees Fahrenheit. Coming out of the floor register, the heat was roughly 69 Fahrenheit, which is typically around where I set my heating for my heating system furnace for the house. And on the glass, if we take a look at the glass, we can see, and this isn't even on a very, very cold day, certainly a fall day, it's 56 degrees Fahrenheit just going through that glass or the glazing. So again, the temperature difference when we talk about temperature swing, even from what, heat loss, thermal efficiency of different materials, right?
Yeah, definitely. Now, the infrared laser thermometer does work on an outside wall. If your client complains about a room being cold, you can scan the wall, and if there's no insulation, you'll see a big change in temperature, obviously, along the wall as you go.
Okay, maybe some people, unless you're doing a lot on the heating cooling side, what about things like gas detectors?
Well, I mentioned before, your nose is a good gas detector, but if you want to confirm it, then that gas detector works quite well and just confirms what you've smelled with your nose. And that there you see it being used on the pipe. But if you put your nose up to that, you'll smell it, guaranteed. Because it smells like rotten eggs.
So I can use that basically to test what a number of different, let's say, connections that are subject to gas piping.
Yeah, gas piping, yes. And there you see the arrow, and that's the bubble test with soap. That works really well.
So
But
this
the
gets
somebody just asked, does it detect volatile organic chemicals? Yes, it does.
a good point. Yeah, so this is just showing what a different depiction of, you really don't need a tool. You can just use some common household elements to basically do a little testing to see if there's any, gas seepage through the piping in your house.
Yes. Oh, by the way, don't use a match.
Yeah. Good point, Harry.
But no, the bubbles work, and that's what typically the gas company uses, or quite often they use after an installation to make sure there's no leaks.
And by the way, just to get back to the price, that's one of my older units, and it probably was in the range of 300. I believe it's probably a halfway decent one today's around $400 to $500, right?
Yeah, and I still have exactly that same one, and it still works.
Yeah, it's a great tool.
It sure is, and it's very easy to operate. It has an off-on switch, and works really well.
Okay, we talked about masks. Well, there's one of my, we'll call it contractor drywall type mask.
Yeah,
And in the middle, we see a carbon monoxide detector that has a digital readout on it. And of course, we talked about even keeping along a tape measure, because sometimes you might want to just check things by the use of measurement, right?
yeah. No, and the tape measure, if you suspect something is undersized or whatever, a tape measure comes in handy just to confirm the size of a beam or whatever. And the CO and gas alarms are mandatory now in most people's homes. And smoke detectors are now required in every bedroom in a new house in Ontario, and every house has to have one carbon monoxide detector. And it's usually placed on the ground floor or the bedroom area. Some people place it by the furnace. That's not what the manufacturer recommends. It needs to be near the sleeping area, so when you're sleeping, you'll hear it immediately when it goes off.
And again, a unit like this is probably in the range of about $50, and just simply a plug-in unit.
Yeah, $50, $60. And again, don't put it near the ceiling, because smoke and fumes tend to curl as they get near the ceiling. So don't put them up near the ceiling. Plug it in near the floor where the outlet is.
You know, amazingly, I've used one similar to this to do inspections. And one of the things I would do, Harry, is right near the beginning is go plug this into an outlet. And while I was doing the home inspection, that might be in the range of a couple of hours, I'll come back and zero is all of a sudden maybe 25 parts per million. So again,
Yes.
I can quickly get a reading within a couple of hours of what is going on in the house. Is it reasonably safe? So if you look at the exposure limits, we can see here 50 parts per million is the high range of what
Yeah.
is really a warning for anybody living in a house that hey, you might want to get out, you might want to air out the house, and you probably have some carbon monoxide source within the house.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I use a carbon monoxide detector, not a plug-in, but it's a handheld model.
Yep.
And it gives a reading fairly quickly if there is something.
Okay, you were talking about earlier, remember that that unit, that moisture meter, that has the two pads on the back, which is what, the guy on the left?
Yeah, the one on the left, that's the one I have, and it's very reliable, and it does 3 different kinds of material: concrete, wood, drywall, and it has a setting button. It's very easy to use and very easy to read the dial.
What about those ones that have those little, we'll call them prongs sticking out of them?
Well, remember, we're not supposed to do any damage, so you can use those, but be careful where you use it so you don't leave little marks on people's surfaces. The electronic one doesn't leave any mark anywhere. And around the toilet, it's using the one moisture meter. That one is electronic and has the prongs on it, the one on the left. And the one on the right is electronic. Now mine has a cable, so I can use it with prongs as well. But they both work very well.
Yeah, so one's called the pin type over to the left, and what, the pinless over to the right, right?
Yeah, that's right. Now
Is this the case of you get what you pay for on these moisture detection devices? Like if you go cheap, you get cheap, or?
Yeah, if I go back to the previous slide, John, that little sort of turquoise one sitting on top is one of those cheapies from what do they call it, Princess Auto, and it was probably like 15, 20 bucks. The moisture encounter, I think, Harry, was what, in the range of about $200-300 easily?
yeah, it's quite expensive.
I think the new ones are almost in the range of about $400 to $500 again.
Yeah,
The ones with the pins here, again, can vary in price. The one to the right is a cheaper model. The one that's more accurate, as you can see with the scale in the middle, is probably kind of mid-range, probably $75 to $100.
yeah. Again, they all work. It depends on what you personally prefer. I prefer the one pinless,
Yes.
and it does no damage to any surface whatsoever, and it's very reliable.
How about a few other inspection tools like these ones?
Yeah, somebody mentioned about binoculars earlier in the comments there. They view the roof from the ground using binoculars. Now, this is just my personal opinion. I like to get as close to the roof as possible before I make a comment. Binoculars are a good tool, but it's not the same as being right up against the shingle. So if possible, try to get as close as possible to the actual surface of the roof. And if that doesn't work, then you have to use binoculars. Excuse me 1 minute. I have to take this call. I'll be right back.
So Claude, on the roof and binoculars, I know there's always the big discussions, especially from insurance. Should the inspector walk on the roof, get on top, or just touch the roof?
Ideally, the best place to, like Harry was indicating, is get up close to the roof itself. In some instances, depending on, again, looking at it from a safety point of view, if it looks safe and it's walkable, I would walk it. If I can only get up to we'll call it the eave or the edge of the roof, I would inspect from there and maybe pull out the binoculars and take a little scan of the roof with my binoculars. And of course, nowadays, if you really think about it, you can get into, those little drones that kind of hum around with camera capabilities and do kind of an aerial survey with a drone that has a camera capability. But a good drone is not going to be in the $100, $200 range. You're probably talking easily in the $1,000 to $2,000 range. And again, there's limitations on the use of drones. Certainly, I know off reserve, especially close to airports, there's concerns. And there's also, and if you're going to use it for commercial purposes, in other words, you're paid to do the home inspection, it's deemed that you need to have a license for it. So again, there are some limitations even with tools like that. certainly they're great inspection tools. But one point I also wanted to raise is a lot of times I want to look at the inside of an attic before I walk a roof. You don't know what condition the sheathing's in. Shingles might look good, but what if the roof sheathing is partially rotted, or there's we'll call it cutouts in the roof that you're not aware of, and your foot goes through, or worse yet, you go through. So again, good points, John, that you raise. I like to walk whenever possible, if it's reasonably accessible. And again, pitch has something to do with it too. If it's a steep pitch roof, do I need some other things to stop me from sliding off the roof and possibly getting injured?
Sorry about that. That was a call from a doctor, so I had to take that call. But as I was saying before, and I think, Claude, you were alluding to that, if possible, get as close as you can to the surface of the roof.
What about that mirror device sitting up on top over the binoculars? What would I use that for, Harry?
Well, we used to use that for furnaces, checking the heat exchanger. But most furnaces today are sealed units, so you really don't need a mirror anymore to look. But if you might also use a mirror to look behind something, say in a cabinet or under a sink or up to see if the taps are leaking. You might use your flashlight and the mirror and shine it up to see if the countertop's wet or damaged. Again, a mirror is not something you need on a regular basis.
Yeah, on occasion I would use it in concealed spaces like you've indicated, and sometimes it was hard to access the information off the data of a furnace or a heating system because it was so close to the wall. The only thing that I could get in there humanly was my inspection mirror.
Yes, no, that's a good point. Yeah, it's good for getting some data from a furnace or an air conditioner that's close to the wall.
And again, that's a little zip level on the bottom electronic version, and it beeps if it's not level. Right now, it's currently turned off.
Yeah.
Again, a little more expensive than your little metal ball bearing, right?
Yeah, but you know what? The ball bearing, I found it works really well, and it impresses the people when it rolls all over the floor. They go, holy mackerel. So again, I have a little level in the toolbox as well. Ball bearing works well.
Okay, so here's some conditions on different inspections, and we can see the purpose of why you might want to bring your tape measure along other than to let your people measure things. How about you as the home inspector?
Yeah, the one on the left where the floor has settled, you need a tape measure to determine how much, so you can write that in your report. The crack on the wall, you need it to measure the separation, and the steps on the right, uneven rises.
So even visually, can't we tell, Harry, get a general idea without even using a tape measure, what's going on with those risers there?
Yes, yeah, the risers are visually, you can see they're uneven. Now, I would just put in my report that the risers are uneven and it's a trip hazard. But some people like to write down that each riser is so much different than the next, and then they indicate the actual dimensions. It's up to the individual how much you want to write in your report.
Okay, how about dealing with things like, again, we saw the laser versions earlier, but temperature, and in this case, also humidity in a house or in any building.
Yeah, and you know what? All those tools are wonderful, but I think on an ordinary home inspection, we don't typically measure temperature or humidity unless the people complain about the windows being constantly wet. That means they have too much humidity. again, it's more specialized when you have those kinds of tools. And temperature, typically we don't measure the temperature in a home unless someone has a specific request for, say they think the house is too cold or whatever.
So again, just pointing out some ideal indoor humidity levels. Certainly, that's why the temperature and humidity section is in here, depending, as we know, in a lot of, well, many First Nation housing issues are related to certainly high moisture levels or water penetration or moisture penetration into the building structure.
Yeah, I agree. And then these tools are very handy if you have issues with moisture or humidity. Then you pretty well need that because you need to know what the humidity level is and the temperature, because the higher the temperature, the more moisture the air can hold.
Okay, let's deal a little bit with the issue of air quality.
Yeah, and that's a very interesting subject, and a lot of people have concerns about the air that they breathe, especially as the houses are quite airtight. And this picture now shows you how to measure for VOCs. And that little sample is sent away to a laboratory and they will send you the results of your air quality.
So it's quite amazing. It says 500 plus airborne chemicals it can measure.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Amazing what it can measure in it, the air quality in any house, right? Or any building, actually.
Yeah, and
And
I think,
are they expensive?
This kit, I believe, Harry, what was it, about $1,000?
yeah, $1,200.
And the actual sample is really looks like a little glass test tube. And what we see there is what, Harry, the pump?
Yeah, that's the pump, and it's usually run for 2 hours, depending on what you're testing for. And while you're doing the inspection, you just let that run. And it's battery operated. And once a year, it has to be calibrated.
I guess the other important thing is chain of custody too, right, Harry?
Yeah, that's a good point. Chain of custody. Try not to let 10 different people handle it. If you're going to do indoor air quality testing, you should do it from start to finish yourself so that it can't be tampered with or altered.
I was mentioning yesterday when we were talking about radon, a little side webinar we were having is again that chain of custody is sometimes even with measuring radon, what happens when the people open the windows or move the, we'll call it the radon a testing puck outside rather than inside the house. Certainly it's going to throw everything askew, right?
Yeah. And same with water testing. That's another thing that some home inspectors do is test the water. A chain of custody. If you're going to take a water sample, bring it to the lab yourself and get the lab result brought to you directly so that, because I won't say anything negative about agents, but they've used bottled water to put in the little bottle to send to the lab for testing. So
I guess
chain of custody.
I was going to say that'd come out pretty good, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would come out nice and clean, wouldn't it? So again, the chain of custody, and that's an important issue, is if you're going to do something, do it to the end.
Okay, how about this thermal imaging camera? We hear a lot today that, these are great wonders, and really, what can we do with the thermal imaging camera other than, in some cases, this was what, in the range of $1,500 to $2,000 for this camera?
Yeah, and when they were first invented, they were $10,000, $12,000. And now you can get one on your phone. Like the picture shows here, it shows the difference in temperatures. It shows where there's missing insulation. It's good to use in an attic space to see if there's where the air leakages are, because it'll show up in an attic space. And again, it's not always required, but if you get into specialized inspections, a thermal imaging camera will show you an awful lot of different things like wet spots, missing insulation.
So again, maybe just to explain a few of these images because they're basically mine. This is the back north wall of my house, and I have a large expansive glass facing north. And as you can see, typically in the winter, we're going to experience a lot of heat loss through that glass.
Definitely.
So if we take a look towards the corner, towards the left-hand side, you'll see that dark looking blue, which almost matches the color of the glass. And what that tells me is in that particular corner, I have a lot of heat loss taking place in that particular corner of the upper wall and roof connection. And if we take along also the ceiling where it meets the wall, it's kind of hit and miss. We see a little bit of blue, a little more green, but these indicate to me the cold spots. So again, in my own house, just doing and kind of playing around with your thermal imaging camera, you can see where things might need to be remedied, or a little bit of extra insulation maybe should have been packed into those areas, not packed, but actually placed in those areas. We don't want to pack it in.
Now you will find at the floor and at the ceiling that temperature differences will be a little different because it's hard to place insulation in those areas.
So as we can see here, if we look at the scale on the bottom, 15 degrees centigrade.
Yeah.
And if we take a look over to the far right, we see a rooftop image of my flat roof on my house. And this was around one of the plumbing stacks. So we see the plumbing stack, sort of the shape of it. And if we take a look sort of beyond it, we can see again that dark bluish color, and over to the right-hand side, some warmer temperature. So from 22 degrees Celsius to upwards in the range of 43 degrees Celsius. So this is on a evening. So evenings are good for a condition like this, and looking at temperature swings. So for example, not so well sealed over to the left, and good high temperatures over to the right. And by the way, this was taken in the summer, so that's why the temperature 43 Celsius is reasonably high. Evening temperatures on a hot, flat, basically, and this was my old tar and gravel roof.
Yeah.
See, I could never do this at my house because then my wife would convince me then she'd have to wear a parka all day in the house. But
you know what, John, we'll have to come over.
I should actually try to do this because, you know, again, my house is 1928, and I know years ago, although my wife doesn't believe me, I did pay a guy to shoot insulation through, you know, my brick and through my plaster lath, and but you know, it is drafty, and so it can
A thermal imaging camera would show you where those drafts are or where the weak areas are.
Right. And now, is there an app I can use off of my phone? Or I think what I'll do, I think next time I see Keith, I'm going to borrow his thermal imaging camera. I'm sure he's got a really good one. Matter of fact, he does.
Yeah,
that's a good idea.
You can get something like this similar. And I was just looking at, by the way, the Canadian Tire ad today, and you can get something a little bit certainly less than this. And I saw it was in the range of $500 at Canadian Tire.
Wow.
So I mean, like Harry said, these have come down significantly in price. The last couple of conferences we went to for the home inspectors, they're basically pushing just an attachment onto your iPhone where you can basically do thermal imaging right on screen from your iPhone. And
Wow.
Yeah,
and again, those were in the range of about what, about $500 too.
yeah, yeah. Now, somebody just posted about reading the air quality tests, interpreting them properly. Yes, it's very important to interpret any test result properly.
Yeah, we're not scientists, are we?
No, but somebody just posted about the water as well. I'm not sure what they meant about the water testing because we don't do the water testing per se. We just collect the water sample and bring it to the laboratory. The lab then analyzes the water just for two things. If you want a more specific water test, you have to go to a private laboratory and they can test the water for tons of different chemicals. But the ones we're concerned about is fecal chloroform and chloroform. That's typically all we as inspectors test the water for.
Yeah, I think the other posting from Priscilla was again the interpretation of the results of an air quality.
Yes,
And certainly you want to take a sample outside and certainly a sample inside as a comparative point.
yes,
And
definitely.
and certainly again off reserve, if somebody wanted to do 3 or 4 spaces, certainly most inspectors are going to charge a bit more because there's more samples being basically not just tested, but just the cost, right?
Yeah, yeah. Now Mel just posted something about home inspection software.
Yeah. Okay, he's interested in your comments about home inspection software. Are your thoughts, Harry?
Well, there's so much software on the market today, it's hard to even know where to start.
Well, that being said, Harry, we've, again, FNNBOA, and even on the radon conversation yesterday, Claudia came up, is the inconsistencies or the need for consistencies for inspectors and First Nations. And in a perfect world, I would love to see everybody have uh, a pad that will be electronic. You just click, 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 and a menu will come down and say, this sentence works. You can fill in a few things. You upload it and you send it in. And furthermore, that CMAC reports and INAC reports are exactly the same. You know, some may ask for different data, but right now, I know years ago, CMAC had a program that theoretically they require, but they stopped supporting. And we were looking at one time last year of taking that program and make it a standard for First Nations. Claude, we talked a little bit about an inspection software, did we, a few months ago as well? On the same
Yeah,
topic?
we kind of had that a discussion about basically an electronic version of the what was known as the automated work description system that CMHC was basically requiring the inspectors in the field complete as part of the inspection report. So much akin to what home inspectors would do, you know, a little different, obviously, because it's a different type of inspection. But because it was mostly theirs was what, for rehabilitation in many cases or accessibility issues. But it could still be tweaked and made into a more uniform system. And I think it gets back to the whole issue that the question is, well, what do you think about it? Well, I think it can be good. For home inspectors, there's probably, what, 50 types of software systems on the market?
At least that many.
And again, varying in prices from cheap to thousands of dollars. And none of them are really overly consistent. They're all kind of private development, and this is what I think would make a good electronic inspection report system. So again, it would have to be, again, customized to the client and certainly customized to the individual. But yeah, I think, as John was saying, if it could become more uniform, certainly it would be better. Certainly when it's in regards to First Nations requirements, and certainly home inspectors, as I indicated, there's so many different varieties at so many different prices. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, because for our purposes, again, we're you know, we're like a multifaceted, a lot of the inspectors. So not only are they doing existing, they're also doing new dwellings, right? So
That's true.
that becomes the more complex, there's more complexities. And again, just recently, well, yesterday, this morning, Jim sent out on, we're again talking about radon and deficiencies and it's a paper trail. And I don't know why that can't all be electronically. Again, one time we put forward that FNNBOA becomes then the data, we collect the data, we build the data, and then we build you know, data sets for communities so they can manage their assets and be the same data sets, right? So right now it's all over the place.
Yeah.
It is an issue, and maybe, you know, I think maybe the time is, you know, we may want to raise it again to CMHC and INAC, and even NRC may be interested because, again, it's all over the map. And what we do is, you know, we call Prince Albert Grand Council, they have a package, and we talk to this community, they have a package. So it's really becomes really a haphazard approach, which is not good.
Yeah, if there was more uniformity, it'd be good. And even nowadays, we start looking at, well, what about the whole issue of, you know, we look at all the national energy codes and all the step and different requirements that people are going to at some point have to probably deal with.
And accessibility.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's going to be a big issue soon.
Priscilla indicated that I have a real estate agent collecting water samples at home, which was crazy. And thank you, Priscilla. I think both Harry and myself realize what you're really indicating is it is very, very foolish. And certainly we have to think about it again, the chain of custody. Do you think that there's a potential conflict of interest here of the agent, the real estate agent saying, oh yeah, I have a sample of water from the house? Harry?
Yeah, oh, definitely. It's a huge conflict of interest. Huge. Now, sometimes what I do, I carry some bottles with me, and when the client says about a water sample, I suggest they take the water sample, they bring it to the lab, and they get the results. Nobody else is involved in the process.
Good point.
And we're supposed to take off the little spout off the water, the fixture, you know, the little screen on the end of the tap. That has to come off if possible before you take the sample, because a lot of germs are in that little screen area. Also, you'll notice the water pressure goes up considerably if that's full of minerals. Water comes out much quicker.
Boy, Harry, I'm not having you in my attics. I'm not even going to have you touch my water taps.
I know, not when they're 50 or 60 years old, that's for sure.
Well, actually, the city, they're coming, I think, in a couple of weeks to change my water meter, which I'm ready for that. That'd be interesting. But secondly, I just got tested for lead, and so my parts per billion are really quite low. So I'm not going to indulge in the $6,000 or $7,000 to replace that. So as my neighbor who lived to 102 and the other one to 100, they were beside me. They drank the same water from the same pipe. I want that water.
I don't blame you.
I think getting back to what you were saying earlier, John, it'd be interesting to find out what other First Nation communities are doing when it comes to inspection, what type of inspection software, if anything, they are using, or how do they manage this whole reporting system, certainly when it comes to, let's say programs such as the RAP, residential rehabilitation. And because that's where a lot of that automated work description came out of. And as you indicated, it was a good program back in the day, but I tried to load it on my computer, the copy I had, and it says, "Hey, it's old junk. We don't look at it anymore. It's not compatible."
Well, I'll tell you how bad our training was on it. Is somebody would go around to the pawn shops, pick up old computers, and load that up, and that's what they learn off of. And I said, "Well, what are we doing?" He said, "Well, that's the only way you can teach it. We have to find a bunch of old, like 64 size computers." And I said, "It's crazy. It's really crazy." And I just said, we can't do that. It's not. We shouldn't be doing that. So yeah, maybe it might be a discussion the board may want to try to pursue. And and now we have a good relationship with NRC, and they've been quite helpful. And we're working with this other company called Ontario One. I don't know if you know these guys, Harry. They're working on standard building permits in Ontario. So the building
I've
permit
heard,
system in
yeah,
Barrie is the same as in Ottawa.
yeah.
And we're looking at getting them to digitize many of our technical guides so that people can access it. So the technology is out there, and I think the cost is down. So maybe it might be time. And at one time, we actually even talked to Dell Computers about getting buying pads, and our price was like something like $500, and I'm probably cheaper now.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I think like Carolyn said here, you probably need an old 486 computer. And I agree with her because, my old computer, I was able to run the AWDS program CMHC had out. And certainly when I tried to see if I could go through the back door of it, it wasn't too friendly on letting me do that. So it was almost, you would be building almost from a paper base into an electronic base.
yeah, and Shannon's made a comment which I agree. That's right. So usually the tribal councils, they have access, but again, it's pretty dated stuff that they're even using. I know, talk with Prince Albert Grand Council and a few tribal councils. It's old. Yeah, maybe it might be time to bring ourselves into the 2000s.
Yeah, and I see a couple of points here by a few of the participants here about asset planners and basically digitizing and bringing things up a little more current, that it's easier to use, not just in the office, but also in the field.
Yeah, I agree. I think we need to, I just make a notes here. I'll make sure I keep this chat here and maybe hire somebody to give us an assessment on asset management. I know there's a bunch of asset management programs out there as well, and I think they're relying on the communities to buy their own plans or their own programming, which is, some have taken that lead. But I think from an inspection perspective, we should be much more innovative and automated.
Yeah, I've done a little preliminary look into things such as Microsoft Access, which can be a good, we'll call it database builder, because it's basically you can input data and you can put in the fields of exactly what's required. The thing is trying to find a commonality for everybody so it becomes more of a uniform standard.
Yeah. Yeah, very
And
good.
that's what John and I were talking before about being unified, and that's where we've been lacking, is unified.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if you're talking about home inspectors, we know that they're their own worst enemies because they're all over the map. And
I
and
know, but it creates problems with reports and how to do it.
well, and even getting back to the whole issue about a database and some of these asset planners, there's probably some, like John said, some really good programs out there. And we don't want to be probably, if you're looking at it from the economics point of view, maybe there's something out there that can be created that's a good thing for everybody, or more standardization to things so that the left can talk to the right and the people in the middle can also enjoy and share that as part of their database.
Exactly.
Anyways, any other thoughts there, Harry, before we begin closing off? There might be a few more points here.
Yeah, the tools. I can't stress that enough. Keep them in good condition. There's nothing worse than arriving at the job site and your flashlight doesn't work, or your ladder, your telesteps ladder doesn't go up or down. Make sure your tools are kept in good condition. Not only does it make you look professional, it also affects your safety when a ladder collapses. So keep them in good condition. Also know what tool to use and when to use it. Examine the tools for damage. Make sure you use them according to the manufacturer's instructions, and use personal protective equipment. And that you have to decide individually when you should wear the equipment. Some people wear it most of the inspection, other people only wear it when they go up in the attic. That's their personal choice.
Okay, if there's any other comments, just seeing here at the end, oh, Mel, I'm trying to implement a program by CRW. I think they're a Winnipeg program. There we go. That holds a comprehensive description of house from room size to the serial number of the refrigerator, but implementation has been interrupted by COVID. Yeah, the inventory process taking a long time. Yes, yeah. Well, we've been also, I think we need to try to get our heads around this and on the programs and more on the software. So for next week is our last webinar, and we had to make an adjustment, as many of you saw through our emails. So next week, I'm going to give a presentation on the authority having jurisdiction and how does that impact in terms of housing responsibility, legal responsibilities, and all that jazz of dealing with contractors and procurement. So I think it's a very important topic, and I call it the elephant in the room. So
I agree with you, John. That's an important topic. Hopefully I can listen to that next week.
Yeah, we'll make sure you're in there, Harry.
yeah,
I don't have to contribute, but definitely. But one, I think it was Carolyn, had a concern about metal ladders near electrical wires. Of course, anything metal should not come near electrical wires.
Lee suggested fiberglass ladders. I think Claude and I were doing a bit of stuff in the summertime, and we had access to a fiberglass ladder. When I went to pick it up, it almost flew out of my hands. It was so light.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, there's different tools. And again, I've never been concerned about my ladder touching the electrical wires. Of course, if it blew over, it might touch, but normally speaking, again, common sense would dictate you don't carry the ladder fully extended walking around the house.
Great. Well, thank you, guys. I think that's kind of a wrap for this particular webinar. And certainly, as John said, I'm looking forward to our next one next Thursday, right, John?
Yes.
That sounds interesting.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Stay safe. talk to you in a week's time.
Night, Rich, yeah.
Thanks again, Harry. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.